Study Session 8. Other Teachings in Aquinas Philosophy. Introduction. In this lecture, you will learn more about the philosophical teachings on Aquinas. Thus, we will continue our discussion of Aquinas by looking at his teachings in the areas of epistemology or theory of knowledge, politics, and morality. Learning outcomes. When you have studied this session, you should be able to describe Aquinas' unique conception of man, state what Aquinas says give human beings the capability to contemplate God, describe Aquinas' view on how the mind acquires knowledge, describe what for Aquinas is the highest good for man, and lastly, describe how Aquinas conceives the states. Aquinas' philosophical teachings. Conception of man. Aquinas had a distinctive conception of man. He says that man is physical substance. This was unique because he insisted upon the unity of human nature. Man is a unity of body and soul. Therefore, without the soul, the body will have no form, and without the body, the soul will not have its required organs of sense, through which to gain its knowledge. Aquinas further maintains that as a physical substance, a person is a composite of soul and body. The soul is the form of the body. The unity that exists between the soul and the body is not accidental as seen in the Platonic idea, but is a substantial unity, that is, the unity between them that is between matter and form, making the two constitute one unified entity. Each complements and is complemented by the other. Worthy to note is the fact that Aquinas did not follow Aristotle to conclude that none, that is the soul or form, and body or matter, can exist without the other, and that the soul, therefore, perishes without the body at death. He maintains that the soul is immortal, that at death it is separated from the body and continues to live on. Aquinas notes that animals and plants have souls, that the soul of a plant performs vegetative functions, that is, it has the capacity of growth, nutrition, and reproduction. The soul of an animal has the power of sensation and locomotion, while the human soul has all the above, including the power of intellection and thought. Some of the powers of the soul cannot be exercised without the body, and these are those the soul shares with plants and animals. The soul can exercise the power of intellection on its own without the body, and that is why the soul can continue conscious life after it is separated from the body. But Aquinas holds that the angels are pure intelligence and that they have no bodies. Even though human beings are rational creatures, their special attributes, Aquinas says, is to exist and function as persons only when unified as body and soul, since it is the soul that confers upon a person bodily form. It equally gives a person life, as well as understanding and other special physical functions. The soul equally accounts for humanity's capacity for sensation and the powers of intellect and will. More than this, humanity's highest capacity is located in the intellect, and this makes human beings rational animals, making them the means and ability to attain the contemplation of God. Aquinas' epistemology. On the problem of knowledge, Aquinas was impressed with the answer Aristotle gave to those who doubted that human mind could arrive at certainty on any subject. Hence, he followed his theory of knowledge. Aquinas accepted Aristotle's approach, opining that the human mind knows what it does through its confrontation with actual concrete objects. The mind is therefore able to grasp what is permanent and stable within sensible things. When we sense things or persons, we know their essence. What we know about them, given the fact that they are in flux, is that they are either more or less a tree or a man, but we are not in doubt about what they are. It was Aquinas' view that there could be no knowledge without sense experience, for nothing could be in the intellect that was not first in the sense. According to him, the intellect sees the universal in the particular thing. It abstracts the universal from the particular. The mind does not possess any innate ideas, but is rather in potentiality to knowledge. Unlike angelic intelligence, the human mind, set in the composite of soul and body, has as its natural object of knowledge the essential properties of physical things. In this way, Aquinas does not base the truth of knowledge on certainty, on a subjective disposition, as Augustine did, but he bases truth on the evidence of being, on an objective condition. Noteworthy is the fact that Aquinas is of the opinion that man's knowledge, with the exception of the revealed knowledge, is completely the work of man. In other words, there is no role played by the divine illumination postulated by Augustine in the acquisition of ordinary knowledge. Aquinas on the idea of the state. Aquinas also ruminated on the idea of the state. He says that the state is a natural institution and that it is derived from the nature of humanity. It is worth mentioning that Aquinas was following the poetical theory of Aristotle and subsequently took the phrase that man is by nature a social animal. It would be recalled that Aristotle supposed that the state could provide for all the needs of humanity because he knew only of the natural needs of humanity. On the other hand, Aquinas believes that in addition to the material of natural needs, humanity also has a supernatural end. But it is not the function of the state to deal with this ultimate end, but the Church directs humanity to this end. Furthermore, he maintains that the state is willed by God and has its God-given functions. He did not believe, like Augustine, that the state is a product of people's sinfulness, but says that even in the state of innocence, human beings will have lived in society. Even then, a common life could not exist unless there was someone in control, that is, someone to attend to the common good. According to Aquinas, the primary function of the state is to serve the common good by keeping the peace, organizing the activities of the citizens into harmonious pursuits, providing for the resources to sustain life, as well as preventing, as possible as it can, obstacles to good life. Aquinas states further that the state is subordinate to the church. Even though he did not consider the church as a superstate, he saw no contradiction in saying that the state has a sphere in which it has a legitimate function and so autonomous, and that at the same time it must subordinate itself to the church, because there are aspects of human life that bear upon humanity's supernatural end. So the state should in no way frustrate human beings' spiritual life. It must be noted that Aquinas is not in any way saying that the church should challenge the autonomy of the state. He says that the state is not absolutely autonomous because of the spiritual dimension of human beings, and hence, he calls the state a perfect society. The spiritual end of humanity cannot be achieved by mere human power, but by divine power, and so this ultimate end, even though it is achieved through divine power, the state must recognize these aspects of human life. We are not saying that the state should become the church, but the sovereign should order these things which lead to heavenly beatitudes and prohibit their constraints as possible as they can. Just as the state rules the behavior of its citizens through the agency of law, the state is in turn limited by the requirements of just laws, as it is not intended to make laws arbitrarily, but must make them under the influence of the natural law, which is humanity's participation in God's eternal law. The lawmakers in a state have authority to legislate from God, the source of all authority, and are responsible to God. Therefore, if the sovereign decrees an unjust law by violating God's divine law, the law must not be observed, reasoned Aquinas. More than these, Aquinas says that the proper effect of law is to lead its subject to their proper virtue, to make those to whom the laws are given good. That is to say, that the effect of law is to make human beings good. Aquinas on ethics. Aquinas' contribution in the area of ethics is prodigious. In Thomistic ethics, Aquinas basically built upon Aristotle's theory of ethics, even though with a Christian orientation. he considered ethics or morality as a quest for happiness, that is, God. While Aristotle was talking of intellectual contemplation of God, the unmoved mover, Aquinas countered on the beatific vision of God in heaven. The highest good for man, for Aristotle, is the philosophical contemplation of God by philosophers here on earth. But for Aquinas, it is the mystical contemplation of God in heaven by anybody who has lived a good life on earth, hence, necessitating his idea on morality. Aquinas agrees with Aristotle that virtue is a mean, that is, it lies between two extremes, and that it is a habit formed by repeatedly and persistently performing the same kind of good actions. Aquinas argues that there is a double level of morality corresponding to a person's natural end and to his or her supernatural end. Furthermore, he opines that morality is majorly the function of reason. This is so because human beings are rational beings, and sequel to that, moral beings. Animals, on the other hand, he says, are moral because they are not rational. Aquinas went on to make a distinction between practical and speculative intellects. Practical intellect has a duty to guide and direct human behavior towards good and away from evil, while the function of speculative intellect is abstract reasoning, as in metaphysics, mathematics, as well as logic. Right reason is therefore the moral standard, which is to say that those actions that conform to right reason are good, while on the contrary, those that are opposed to right reason are evil actions. Furthermore, Aquinas maintains that freedom of the will is a necessary presupposition of morality. This is so because if the will is not free, then we cannot account for moral responsibility for actions. And so, how would we reasonably blame, punish, praise, or even reward people for their right or wrong actions if they were not acting freely? Following the necessity of free will, Aquinas says that determinism, denying human freedom, removes the basis of morality. But we should hold and maintain that the will is free and that human actions are free actions as well. A free action is a voluntary as well as conscious action that has a source within the agent of himself or herself. And so the doer of a voluntary action must know what he or she is doing and must be from the person's free decision and not under compulsion. Thus, an action performed out of ignorance for Aquinas is not voluntary, nor can forced actions be voluntary. He further distinguishes between the role of the intellect and that of the will in human actions. The role of the intellect, he says, is to enlighten and illuminate an action before it is done. That is, it enlightens, examines the actions, and gives approval or disapproval of the action. On the other hand, the role of the will is to execute an action in line with the enlightenment, approval or disapproval given by the intellect, and so the will is always supposed to be guided by the intellect. However, there are four things to consider before we can be in good position to make moral judgment about an action. They are: 1. We must consider whether the action was voluntary, the specific nature of the action, the intention of the action, as well as the circumstances in which the action was carried out. Human beings have an innate and natural disposition to grasp the fundamental principles of morality. The human nature means that human beings must act in one way or the other. Aquinas says that we grasp and know the fundamental moral principles by intuition, and that the capacity of the intuitive apprehension is natural in human beings, and it is called synderesis. Also, by synderesis, we know that certain kinds of actions are right or wrong. It is the conscience that applies this knowledge to the particular action we intend to perform in a given situation, in order to see if the proposed action, given the situation, falls within the category of right or wrong actions. Having done this, the conscience comes up with a decision as to if the proposed action should be performed or avoided. Even though the conscience can be wrong in making the decision regarding the rightness or wrongness of an action, Aquinas insists that the judgment made by the conscience should always be obeyed. Human beings should not go against the conscience for every conscience, whether right or wrong, whether it concerns things evil in themselves or things morally wrong, whether it concerns things evil in themselves or things morally indifferent, obliges us to act in such a way that he who acts against his conscience sins. We should recall that morality, as Aquinas viewed it, is not an arbitrary set of rules for behavior. The basis of moral obligation is found, first of all, in the very nature of humanity. Various inclinations are built into the human nature, such as the preservation of life, the propagation of species, and because of the fact that people are rational, the inclination towards search for truth, hence, the basic moral truth is to do good and avoid evil. However, to ensure order in the society, human laws are formed for the proper direction of the community's behavior. The moral law is founded upon human nature, that is, upon the natural inclinations towards specific modes of behavior, and upon the reason's ability to discern the right and the proper course of conduct. Human nature has certain characteristics, and so the rules for behavior that correspond to these features are called natural laws. Aquinas reasoned that humanity's existence and nature can be fully understood only when seen in relation to God. The natural law must be described in metaphysical and theological terms, just as the Stoics and St. Augustine did. For Aquinas, law has to do with reason, and so the rule and measure of acts is the reason. This is because it belongs to reason to direct a person's activity towards his or her end. Law consists of those rules and measures of human acts, and so is based on reason, and the natural law is dictated by the reason. Furthermore, Aquinas argues that since God is the creator of all things, human nature and the natural law are best understood as the product of God's wisdom or God's reason, and on this backdrop, he distinguishes 4 types of law. Eternal law refers to the fact that the whole community of the universe is governed by divine reason. Thus, eternal law are laws of God, the creator of all things. Natural law for Aquinas consists of that portion of the eternal law that pertains to people. The participation of the eternal law in the rational creatures is called the natural law. The natural law is nothing else than the rational creature's participation in the eternal law. It is also fitting to reiterate at this juncture that the basic precepts of natural law are the preservation of life, propagation and education of offspring, and pursuit of truth, a peaceful society, and so. The natural law consists of broad general principles that reflects God's intervention for human being in creation. The third type of law is the human law, which refers to the specific statutes of government. They are derived from the general precepts of natural law. From the perspective of natural laws, the human reason needs to proceed to the more particular determination of certain matters, and these particular determinations, devised by human reasons, are called human laws. Aquinas maintains that what gives a rule that character of law is its moral dimension, its conformity with the precepts of natural law, as well as its agreement with the moral law. Nevertheless, Aquinas holds that every human law has just so much of the nature of law as it is gotten from the law of nature. He further adds that if it deflects from the law of nature at any point, it is no longer a law, but a perversion of law. For Aquinas, it is necessary that besides the natural and the human law, human beings should be directed to supernatural end by a law given by God, that is, the divine law. The divine law, Aquinas says, is available to people through revelation and is found in the scriptures. It is given to humanity through God's grace and not human reason, to ensure that all people know what they must do to fulfill both their natural end and especially their supernatural end. Aquinas maintains that there are some differences between natural law and divine law. For him, natural law represents humanity's rational knowledge of the good, but which the intellect directs the will to control humanity's appetites and passions, while the divine law comes directly from God through revelation. whereas natural law leads people to fulfill their natural end by achieving the cardinal virtues of justice, temperance, courage, and prudence. Divine law is a gift of God's grace, whereby people are directed to their supernatural ends, having obtained the higher or theological virtues of faith, hope, and love. Study session summary. In this study session, you have learned that Aquinas had a distinctive conception of man as that which is a composite of soul and body. 2. He did not follow Aristotle to conclude that none, that is the soul of form and the body of matter, can exist without the other, that the soul perishes without the body at death. For him, the soul is immortal and is separated from the body at death and continues to live on. 3. In the area of knowledge, he maintains that there could be no knowledge without experience. 4. In politics, he asserts that the primary function of the state is to serve the common good by keeping the peace, organizing the activities of the citizens into harmonious pursuits, providing for the resources to sustain life, as well as preventing obstacles to good life. And lastly, in the area of ethics, Aquinas is of the opinion that human beings as rational beings are moral beings. Hence, the basic moral truth is to do good and avoid evil. End of study session 8. Thank you for listening.